The envelope slid across the white tablecloth and stopped right in front of me. Brent leaned back in his chair, one arm draped over it like he owned the room. "Take it," he said, calm and sure of himself. "You've taken enough from this family." For a second I just looked at it. Not at him, not at Amber. Just the envelope. Thick paper, cream-colored, the kind you use when you want something to feel official and final. At 52, I'd learned something about silence. It isn't weakness. It's a choice. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is sit still long enough to see who someone really is. That night I saw everything. I picked up the envelope, slowly feeling the weight of it between my fingers. Brent watched me like he'd already won. Amber smiled soft and polite, like we were discussing dinner plans instead of my life. "Go ahead," she said. "It's more than fair." Fair. I opened it. Inside was a check, $150,000, neatly printed, signed. Under it, a stapled document, 3 pages, legal language tight and cold. Vacate the house within 30 days. Waive any claim to family property. No future disputes. And then tucked behind that, a single sheet of paper. Not legal, not formal. A list. I read it once, then again. Recommended options, it said at the top. A 1-bedroom apartment complex in Garland, discount furniture stores, a grocery chain known for clearance bins, even a note about budget-friendly pharmacies. For a moment I couldn't hear the restaurant anymore. Just a kind of quiet pressure in my chest. I looked up. Amber was watching me closely, her hand resting on the edge of the table, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Her perfume hit me again, sweet, heavy, the kind that lingers too long. Brent didn't even try to hide it. He looked satisfied. Like this was a business deal. Like I was a problem he was finally solving. I folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Then I set it down. "Right between us." I smiled. "Is this everything I asked?" Brent nodded. "That's generous, Diane. You walk away clean. No lawyers, no mess." "No more confusion," Amber added gently. "We all move forward." "Forward." I nodded once slow. Then I leaned back in my chair and glanced past them through the tall glass windows of Bob's Steak and Chop House, out to the valet stand. My car was parked near the curb, a silver Honda Accord, 5 years old, clean but nothing special. Brent followed my gaze and gave a short laugh. "Still driving that thing, huh?" I didn't answer right away. That car was the last thing Charles ever gave me. Not expensive, not flashy. He'd shown up one afternoon, keys in his hand, smiling like a boy. "Saw it and thought of you," he'd said. "Reliable, no nonsense." I kept it because of that. Not because I had to. I turned back to Brent. "It runs just fine," I said. Amber smiled again, that same tight smile. "Of course it does." A waiter came by asking if we wanted dessert. Brent waved him off without looking. "No, we're good," he said. Good. I reached for my water glass and took a small sip, steadying myself. I could feel the ring on my finger, my wedding ring. I'd twisted it without thinking, something I'd started doing during Charles's last months. Hospital rooms, late nights, machines beeping. You learn how to hold yourself together in small ways. Brent leaned forward slightly. "Look, Diane, I don't want this to drag out. Dad's gone. Things need to be handled properly." Handled. "I think this is more than fair," he continued. "You had a good run, 7 years, you're set." There it was. 7 years. Like I'd been on some kind of contract. Amber placed her hand lightly over his. "We're trying to do this the right way." I looked at her hand, the bracelet, the ring. Then back at her face. "You put that list together?" I asked. She didn't flinch, just trying to help. "Help?" I nodded slowly. "I appreciate that," I said. And I did, in a way. Because in that moment, everything became very clear. Not just what Brent thought of me, but who he'd decided to be. I picked up the envelope again, tapped it lightly against the table, then slid it back toward him. "I'll need some time," I said. Brent frowned just slightly. "There's nothing to think about." "There is for me." A pause. He studied me like he was trying to figure out where the resistance was coming from. Amber's smile faded just a little. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Brent said, quieter now. I met his eyes. "I'm not," I said. And for the first time that night, something shifted in his expression. Just a flicker. I stood up, smoothing out my jacket. "Thank you for dinner," I said. Neither of them moved. I walked past the table, past the low hum of conversation, past the bar where a couple laughed too loudly, past the valet stand where my car waited under the yellow lights. The night air in Dallas was warm, still. I paused for a second before getting in. Then I sat behind the wheel, hands resting lightly on it, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. He thought $150,000 would buy my silence. What he didn't know was that envelope had just shown me exactly what he was planning. And exactly what I needed to do next. Because this was never just about a house. I didn't drive home right away. I sat there in the parking lot, the engine off, the quiet settling in around me. The restaurant lights reflected softly across the windshield, blurring just enough to make everything feel distant. For a moment I closed my eyes. And just like that I was back in a hospital room. Charles's hand in mine, dry, warm, thinner than it used to be. "You don't have to fight him," he'd said, his voice low, uneven from the oxygen. "Not right away." I remember leaning closer. "He's your son." He gave a small smile. "He's a good man somewhere under all that noise." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I believed it. Charles squeezed my hand, what little strength he had left. "Let him show you who he is," he whispered. "Don't stop him too soon. Some lessons you can't teach. They have to be lived." That was the last real conversation we had. I opened my eyes again and looked at my hands on the steering wheel. Same hands, same ring. Different world. I started the car and pulled out slowly, letting the valet guide me through the line. Dallas traffic was still busy for a Friday night, headlights stretching down the road like a long ribbon. I drove without music, just the hum of the road. 7 years. That's what Brent had reduced it to. A good run. I let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. 7 years of early mornings making coffee the way Charles liked it. Black, no sugar. 7 years of learning the rhythm of his life, what made him quiet, what made him laugh, what he never said out loud. 7 years of sitting beside hospital beds, arguing with insurance companies, memorizing medication schedules, and holding his hand when he couldn't sleep. Brent hadn't been there for most of that. He'd come and gone. Holidays, occasional visits, always with one eye on his phone, the other on whatever deal he was chasing next. I remember one night about 3 weeks before Charles passed. Brent had stopped by, stayed maybe 20 minutes. Charles was asleep. Brent stood at the foot of the bed, hands in his pockets. "He looks worse," he said. I nodded. "He is." A pause. Then he looked at me, not unkindly, but not kindly either. "You'll be okay, though," he said. "You've got things figured out." I didn't know what he meant at the time. Now I did. I turned onto the highway, the city lights thinning out as I headed toward Highland Park. The house felt different after Charles was gone. Too quiet. Too still. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a second before going inside. The same porch light, the same front door. Everything looked exactly the same. But it wasn't. I stepped inside, slipped off my shoes, and set my purse on the console table. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, something I'd used earlier that day just to keep busy. I walked into the living room and stopped. Charles's chair was still there. I hadn't moved it. Couldn't, if I was being honest. I crossed the room slowly and sat down in it, my fingers brushing over the worn leather armrest. "You would have hated that dinner," I said softly. The words sounded strange out loud. I leaned back, staring at nothing in particular, and reached into my pocket. The envelope. I'd taken it with me after all. I pulled it out and opened it again, laying everything out on the coffee table. The check. The agreement. And that list. I picked up the list first. Recommended options. I read through it again, slower this time. A 1-bedroom apartment complex in Garland. Rent estimates circled in pen. Notes about senior-friendly amenities. A discount grocery store chain with a little star next to it. It wasn't just insulting. It was calculated. They hadn't just assumed I was poor. They'd planned my next life around it. I set the paper down and picked up the agreement. 3 pages of legal language, clean and careful. I read it line by line. Then I read it again. Something about it didn't sit right. Not the house part. That was straightforward. It was the phrasing around any and all claims, direct or indirect, present or future, related to Mercer Family Holdings and associated entities. Too broad. Too vague. Too useful. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't needed in a while. It rang twice. Linda Chavez, a familiar voice, answered. Linda, it's Diane Mercer. A beat, then warmth. Diane, I'm so sorry, I've been meaning to call you. I know, I said gently. It's been a lot. A pause. What can I do for you? I glanced down at the papers spread out in front of me. I just got out of dinner with Brent, I said. He gave me something I think you should look at. Her tone shifted immediately, sharper, focused. What kind of something? A check, an agreement, and a few extras. Extras, she repeated. You'll see. Another pause. Bring it in tomorrow, she said. First thing, 9 o'clock. I'll be there. I hung up and set the phone down. For a moment I just sat there staring at the papers. Then I gathered them back into the envelope and placed it neatly on the table. I leaned back in Charles's chair again, closing my eyes. I didn't stop him, I murmured, just like you said. A quiet settled over the room. Not heavy, just present. I sat there a long time before getting up. The next morning came quicker than I expected. Dallas mornings have a certain kind of light, bright, but not harsh yet. I made coffee black out of habit more than anything, and stood by the kitchen window while it brewed. The house felt less empty in the daylight. Still quiet. But manageable. I got dressed simply, navy slacks, a light blouse, low heels, nothing that drew attention. I picked up my purse, hesitated, then reached for something on the counter. Charles's old pen. He'd carried it for years, said it was the only one that felt right in his hand. I slipped it into my purse. Then I grabbed the envelope and headed out. Linda's office was in a small building just off McKinney Avenue. Nothing flashy, clean, professional. I'd always liked that about her. No nonsense. I walked in a few minutes early. The receptionist smiled and nodded me toward the waiting area, but before I could sit, Linda's door opened. Diane, she said, stepping out, come on in. Her office was just as I remembered. Shelves of files, a large desk, a couple of chairs across from it. I handed her the envelope without a word. She opened it, pulled everything out, and started reading. I watched her face. At first, nothing. Then a slight tightening around her eyes. She read the agreement once, then again slower. Finally, she looked up. Well, she said quietly, that's ambitious. I gave a small humorless smile. That's one way to put it. She tapped the paper lightly with her finger. He's not just asking you to leave the house, she said. This language here, any and all claims related to Mercer Family Holdings, that's broad enough to include things he probably doesn't even realize you have. I felt something settle into place. I thought so, I said. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. Does Brent know about your shares, she asked. Number. And you've never told him? Number. A pause. Then she nodded slowly. Good, she said. Good, I repeated. Yes, she said, a faint smile forming. Because if he knew, he wouldn't have written it like this. I leaned forward slightly. What do you mean? Linda tapped the agreement again. It means, she said, he's trying to get you to sign away something he doesn't even know you control. The room went very still. I felt my heartbeat in my chest, steady calm. Not fear. Something else. Understanding. I sat back in the chair and let out a slow breath. So the house, I said? Isn't the point, Linda finished. We looked at each other. And in that moment, the whole thing shifted. This wasn't about pushing me out. This was about clearing the way for something bigger. Diane, Linda said carefully, when is the next shareholders' meeting? I didn't answer right away. Because I already knew. The 23rd, I said, 2 weeks from Monday. Linda held my gaze for a second, then looked back down at the agreement. She took off her glasses, folded them carefully, and set them on the desk. Then that's your clock. I nodded, but my mind had already moved ahead of us. Brent had never been subtle a day in his life. Even as a boy, according to Charles, he'd rather kick a locked door than try the handle. If he was trying to rush me now, it meant he was under pressure. What is he doing? I asked. Linda didn't answer right away. She reached for a yellow legal pad and wrote down 3 things: estate trust board. First, she said, I want a full review of every document tied to your trust holdings. Second, I want to know whether he's made any representations to lenders or board members based on family control. Third, I want you not to sign a single thing, not a text, not an email, nothing. I can manage that. She gave me a look over the top of her desk. Can you? I almost smiled, yes. She leaned back. Good. Because once we start pulling on this thread, things may get loud. That part I believed. By the time I left Linda's office, the sun was fully up and Dallas was moving fast. Delivery trucks, dog walkers, men in sport coats carrying coffee like the day belonged to them. I got into my Honda, closed the door, and sat there for a second with both hands on the wheel. I wasn't scared exactly, but I was tired. Not physically, not the kind of tired a nap fixes. The kind that comes from being pulled into something ugly when all you wanted was a little peace. Charles had been gone just under 4 months. 4 months of casserole, sympathy cards, estate papers, thank you notes, and rooms that still held his shape. 4 months of people asking how I was doing in voices that told me they didn't really want an honest answer. And now this. I drove home by way of the pharmacy and the grocery store just to delay being alone with my thoughts. By noon, I was back in the kitchen standing over a half-unpacked bag of oranges when my phone buzzed. Brent. I let it ring. Then a text. Have you had time to think? A second one came before I could even lock the screen. I'm trying to do this respectfully. I stared at that word, respectfully. Then another. Amber was only trying to help. That one almost made me laugh. I set the phone face down on the counter and finished putting away the groceries. 10 minutes later, it buzzed again. If you want to bring a lawyer into this, that's your choice. But it will get expensive fast. There it was, the soft threat. I picked up the phone and typed one sentence. I received the documents. Then I deleted it. Linda was right. No texts, no little openings. I put the phone away and carried the oranges to the fruit bowl. My hand brushed against the old voicemail button icon on the screen without meaning to, and suddenly I was staring at a saved message from Charles. 3 years old. I hadn't played it in months. I pressed it anyway. Diane, it's me. I'm at the hardware store and I can't remember if you said satin finish or eggshell for the guest room. Call me back. And don't laugh, I know they're not the same. I stood in the kitchen and listened to that ridiculous message twice. Nothing profound, nothing cinematic. Just Charles forgetting paint. And somehow that was the hardest thing in the world. I set the phone down and leaned my hands against the counter until the feeling passed. By late afternoon, Linda called back. I've started digging, she said, and I don't like what I'm seeing. I pulled out a chair and sat down. Tell me. There's chatter around a merger proposal, quiet so far but real. Mercer Industrial and a logistics group out of Houston. Brent's been talking like he has more family backing than he actually does. My stomach tightened. What kind of merger? The kind that sounds efficient in a board packet and ugly on a factory floor. I closed my eyes for a second. Mercer Industrial wasn't some shiny tech company. It made real things, industrial components, machine parts. The kind of business built on people showing up for 30 years, not branding campaigns and keynote speeches. What does he gain, I asked. Access, she said. Debt relief, maybe. Positioning, a seat he hasn't earned. And what does the company lose? Linda paused. Depends how far it goes. Jobs, plant stability, maybe pensions down the road if he gets reckless enough. I sat very still. That was the moment it stopped being about me. Up until then, I had imagined a dozen endings. Refuse to sign. Take a smaller house. Let Brent posture in boardrooms until reality caught up with him. Walk away and protect whatever peace I had left. That all changed when Linda said pensions. People my age and older hear that word differently. It isn't abstract. It's medicine, mortgage payments, a roof, groceries that don't feel like a calculation. When will you know more, I asked. Soon, she said, but I think there's someone you should talk to before then. Who? Eddie Collins. That surprised me. Eddie's still there. Plant manager in Fort Worth, nearing retirement, loyal to Charles. He called this morning after hearing Brent's name attached to the merger talk. I hadn't seen Eddie in over a year, but I knew exactly who he was. Big shoulders, slow voice hands, like he'd spent his whole life lifting things that mattered. Charles trusted him, more than he trusted most men in suits. Did he say what he wanted, I asked. He wants to meet, Linda said, in person. The next morning I drove to a diner off Interstate 31, of those places with cracked vinyl booths, strong coffee, and waitresses who call everybody honey whether they mean it or not. Eddie was already there when I came in, sitting in the back with a mug in both hands. He stood when he saw me. Mrs. Mercer, he said. It's Diane, I told him. He nodded. Diane. He looked older than I remembered. Not weaker, just worn in the honest way. We sat down, ordered coffee, and for a minute we talked about nothing, traffic, weather, how terrible Dallas drivers had gotten. Then he leaned forward. "I'm just gonna say it plain," he said. "Brent's been telling folks he'll have enough family support to push this thing through." I didn't interrupt. "He's been floating words like streamlining and restructuring. You know what that means?" "Yes," I said. He looked down into his coffee. "I got men out there been with Mercer 28, 31, 34 years. Women too. Some of them trained Brent when he was still wearing loafers without socks and pretending he knew how a production line worked." That got the smallest smile out of me. Eddie didn't smile back. "They're scared," he said. "And they're embarrassed to be scared. Because they loved your husband. He built that place with them, not alone, with them." I swallowed. He went on. "I'm 68. I can retire if I have to. It won't be pretty, but I can do it. Some of them can't. And if Brent's using family control as a bluff, somebody needs to stop him before bluff turns into paperwork." There it was, clean and hard. Not revenge, responsibility. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. It had gone lukewarm. I almost signed, I admitted. Eddie looked up. "Last night I sat at my kitchen counter and thought maybe I should just be done. Let him have his illusion. Move somewhere smaller. Start over quiet." He nodded once as if that made perfect sense. "But," he said. I looked out the diner window at the traffic moving past. "But peace built on a lie doesn't stay peaceful very long." Eddie sat back. For the first time that morning, some of the strain in his face eased. "I figured Charles picked right," he said. That almost undid me. I looked down quickly, reached into my purse, and closed my fingers around Charles's pen. Cool metal. Familiar weight. By the time I got home, I knew what I was going to do. That evening, I opened my laptop and drafted an email agreeing to discuss transition terms. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I deleted every word. Instead, I called Linda. "I'm in," I said. She didn't ask what changed. "Good," she said, "because the meeting isn't just a vote. It's the only place the truth goes into the official record. And once the truth is in the record, it gets a lot harder to bury." The morning of the shareholders' meeting, I woke up before the alarm. Still dark outside, quiet enough to hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I lay there for a minute, looking up at the ceiling, my hands folded over the blanket like I was waiting for test results. That's what it felt like, really. Not excitement, not fear exactly. Just that flat, tight feeling that comes before something you can't call back once it starts. I got up and made coffee, black. I stood at the counter in my robe while it brewed, watching the first light come in over the backyard. The oak tree Charles had insisted on keeping still cast the same crooked shadow across the fence. For one brief second, I wished I were doing something ordinary that day, paying bills, folding towels, meeting a friend for lunch. But ordinary had already left the room. I showered, dressed, and kept everything simple. A navy dress from Nordstrom, low heels, small gold earrings, nothing dramatic, nothing that could be mistaken for performance. I slipped Charles's pen into my purse, then stood in front of the mirror a second longer than usual. You don't owe anybody a scene, I told myself, just the truth. The Hilton Anatole was already buzzing when I got there. Men in suits, women with leather portfolios, assistants moving fast with phones in their hands and badges swinging from their necks. The Mercer Industrial Annual Meeting had never exactly been a circus, but it had its own kind of theater. Money always does. I parked, took a breath, and walked in. Linda was waiting near the ballroom entrance with a slim folder tucked under one arm. She wore charcoal gray and the kind of expression that made people step aside without knowing why. "You sleep?" she asked. "Not much." She nodded. "That makes two of us." We walked in together. The ballroom had been set up with rows of chairs facing a raised platform and projection screen, coffee stations along the back wall, a long registration table near the entrance. I recognized several faces right away: older shareholders, 2 retired executives, a widow from Plano who had owned stock longer than Brent had been alive. And there near the front was Amber. Cream silk dress, perfect hair, sitting tall beside Brent like she was already practicing for a future she thought belonged to her. She looked polished and expensive and just uneasy enough around the eyes to tell me Brent hadn't fully reassured her. Brent was near the side aisle talking to 2 board members, Navy suit, red tie, expensive watch, clean haircut. He looked like he'd built himself in a catalog. Then he saw me. You could actually watch the calculation happen in his face. First surprise, then annoyance, then confidence again. He excused himself and walked over. "Diane," he said, stopping in front of me, "I didn't expect to see you here this early." "I'm a shareholder," I said. "Seems appropriate." His jaw tightened just a little. Linda didn't move, didn't speak, just stood beside me holding her folder. Brent glanced at her. "So we're doing this." "You started it at dinner," I said. His voice stayed low, controlled. "You could have handled this privately." "So could you?" For a second, nobody said anything. Then he gave a short nod, almost like he was disappointed in me. "That offer was generous," he said. "More generous than most people would have been." "Was the apartment list your idea?" I asked, "or Amber's?" "That landed." His expression changed not much but enough. "That was meant to be practical." Humiliating and practical are not the same thing. He looked at Linda again. "You know, once this turns public, there's no putting it back in the box." Linda finally spoke. That concern would have been more convincing before the deceptive waiver language. His mouth flattened. It wasn't deceptive. "No," she said. He looked at me one last time. "You really want to do this in front of everyone?" I held his gaze. "You brought me papers over a steak dinner," I said. "So yes, I think front of everyone will do just fine." He stepped back. Not dramatic, not stomping off, just a man realizing the floor under him might not be as solid as he thought. As he turned away, I noticed Eddie Collins in the third row near the aisle. Dark suit he probably only wore to funerals and weddings. Thick hands folded in his lap. He gave me one small nod. That steadied me more than anything. The meeting started right on time. Routine first. Minutes approved. Year-end numbers. Operational summaries. A slide deck nobody cared about more than they had to. Brent sat forward, composed again, making notes now and then like a man with plans. Then came the merger discussion. A consultant got up first and walked through the usual language. Synergy, efficiency, streamlining operations, positioning for long-term growth. I looked around the room. Older shareholders had that same careful expression people wear when they suspect they're being sold something in a brighter package than it deserves. Eddie didn't move, just watched. Then Brent was invited to speak. He stood smoothly, buttoned his jacket, and stepped toward the podium with all the confidence of a man who'd rehearsed this in the mirror. My father believed in evolution he began. Not standing still, not clinging to legacy for legacy's sake, but building something durable enough to survive change. I almost smiled at that. Charles had believed in patience, precision, payroll met on time, equipment maintained before it failed. He did not, to my knowledge, ever use the phrase clinging to legacy for legacy's sake. Brent kept going. He spoke well, I'll give him that. Calm voice, measured cadence, the kind of polished language people mistake for competence if they haven't spent enough time around real work. Then he said it. "With the support of my family and those committed to the company's future, I believe this merger gives Mercer Industrial its strongest path forward." Linda's hand shifted on the folder. I looked once toward the front table where the corporate secretary sat. Then I stood. The movement rippled through the room before I said a word. Brent stopped. He looked at me, and for a split second I saw it, the old assumption. That I'd ask an emotional question, make a scene, say something he could dismiss. Instead I said I'd like the floor. The chair of the meeting nodded. "Mrs. Mercer, you may proceed." Brent stepped back from the podium slowly. "Diane, this really isn't." Linda rose beside me. "It very much is." A few heads turned, papers shifted. You could feel the room wake up. I walked to the standing microphone in the center aisle. My heels sounded louder than they probably were. I set one hand lightly on the podium edge, not because I needed support, but because I wanted stillness. "My name is Diane Mercer," I said, "and before this vote moves any further, there's something this room needs clarified." Brent let out a breath through his nose. "This is unnecessary." I didn't look at him. 2 weeks ago, I said Brent invited me to dinner and presented me with a legal agreement. It included a check for $150,000 in exchange for vacating my home and waiving current and future claims related to Mercer Family Holdings. A murmur moved through the room. Brent stepped forward. It was about the house. I turned then and looked straight at him. Then why does paragraph 4 attempt to waive rights connected to trust, shares you assumed I didn't have? The room went still. Not quiet, still. That kind of stillness is different. It has weight. Brent opened his mouth, closed it. Linda stepped up beside me and handed a copy of the agreement to the chair and corporate counsel. We have the executed draft presented to Mrs. Mercer at dinner, she said. We also request the ownership record be entered for clarification before any vote proceeds. The company secretary, a woman who had been with Mercer so long she probably remembered Brent's braces, adjusted her glasses, and began sorting through papers already in front of her. That caught his attention. He turned fast. What is this? No one answered him immediately. The chair looked to corporate counsel, then to the secretary. Please read the relevant ownership position into the record, counsel said. The secretary nodded. Her voice was steady, almost boring, which somehow made it hit harder. The Diane Mercer Trust currently holds a controlling voting block through inherited and assigned Mercer Industrial shares, inclusive of standing proxy authority and related voting rights previously disclosed in estate filings and board records. You could feel the air change. Really feel it. A retired engineer in the back row leaned back in his seat and crossed his arms with a slow nod, like something he'd suspected had finally become official. Two people at the side table started whispering. Someone near the front actually said, "Well, I'll be damned," under his breath. Brent stared at the secretary like she'd started speaking another language. That's not possible, he said. Linda's voice stayed calm. It is possible, it is documented, and it is effective. Amber turned in her seat so fast her chair legs scraped the floor. You said she had nothing, she blurted. Brent snapped without even looking at her. Amber, stop. Too late. Half the room had heard. The polished surface cracked right there, not with some huge explosion, just one ugly little sentence that told everybody exactly what kind of private conversations had been happening behind closed doors. Brent straightened and tried to recover. This is clearly an emotional interference tactic, he said louder now. My stepmother. I cut in, not raising my voice. Actually, Brent, I am the majority shareholder in this room, so I'd appreciate a little respect while I'm speaking. That one landed harder than I expected. Not because it was clever, because it was true. And truth has a certain sound when it hits a room full of people who know power when they hear it. Brent's face went red from the collar up. I turned back to the microphone. I'm not here to embarrass anyone, I said. I'm here because representations have been made about family support for a merger that I do not support, and because an attempt was made to secure my signature under language broad enough to affect rights. Brent Mercer either failed to understand or hoped I wouldn't. The chair looked toward counsel again. Counsel cleared his throat. In light of the document presented and concerns regarding external lender representations tied to anticipated family control, I recommend postponement of merger action pending independent review. There it was. The legal version of a body blow. Brent looked from counsel to the board to me. You can't be serious. One of the older board members, a man who had played golf with Charles for years, finally spoke. I'm very serious, he said. And frankly, son, you should be grateful this came out before the vote. Son. Not Brent, not Mr. Mercer, son. That did something to him. I saw it. He wasn't just losing the room, he was being put back in it. I reached into my purse then and pulled out Charles's pen. I didn't even need it, really. I just wanted it in my hand when I said the next part. When the vote is called, I said I vote no on this merger. And yes on an independent review of family governance and executive representations tied to Mercer Industrial. The chair nodded, entered. Several voices followed almost immediately. Seconded. Agreed. About time. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough. Enough to make it clear Brent was finished. Not ruined forever, not thrown into the street. This wasn't a movie. But finished in the one place he had counted on controlling. He stood there for another few seconds looking around the room like he might still find an opening. He didn't. Amber had gone pale. Eddie sat still as stone. Linda closed her folder. And Brent looked at me with something I had never seen in him before. Not contempt, not arrogance. Confusion. As the room started moving again, papers gathering, quiet conversations, starting the machinery of corporate consequences beginning to turn, he took one step toward me. "Who are you?" he asked. I looked at him for a moment. Then I answered the only way that mattered. "Someone you never bothered to know." By the time the ballroom began to empty, Brent was standing by himself near the front row, still holding a stack of papers he no longer seemed to know what to do with. People passed him, but not the way they had an hour earlier. Before they had stopped for him, leaned in, smiled, listened. Now they nodded politely and kept walking. That more than anything seemed to hit him. Not the vote, not Amber slipping out the side door without waiting for him, not even the board council quietly asking him to remain available for follow-up questions. It was the fact that the room had moved on. I was gathering my things when he came over. Not fast, not angry. Just slower than usual, like his body had finally caught up to what had happened. "Diane." I turned. For a second he looked younger, not softer, just stripped of all that polished certainty he wore like armor. "We need to talk," he said. Linda, standing beside me, shifted slightly, but I gave her a small look and she stepped back. Brent glanced around the room, then lowered his voice. "Privately." I held my folder against my side. "You had a chance to speak privately. You brought me legal papers over dinner." "That's not what this is." "No," I said, "it isn't." His jaw worked for a second. I didn't know. I almost smiled. "No," I said quietly, "you didn't." He looked down, then back up at me. "Dad never told me." There was something in the way he said it that might have earned sympathy from somebody else. Hurt, maybe, even betrayal. But all I could think about was Charles in that hospital bed. Weak, tired, still trying to protect what he'd built from a son who wanted ownership without responsibility. "He told you what mattered," I said. Brent's face tightened. "You don't get to talk to me like you knew him better than I did." The words came out fast, defensive, almost automatic. And there it was again, the old impulse, the one that had caused all of this. Not grief, not reflection. Possession. I looked at him for a long moment before I answered. "I was the one changing his sheets at 3 a.m, I said. "I was the one arguing with insurance when they denied treatments. I was the one sitting beside him when he couldn't sleep because he was afraid." I took a breath. "And I was the one listening when he talked about what would happen after he was gone." Brent didn't move. I kept my voice even. "That should have mattered to you more than the house, more than the stock, more than whatever version of control you thought you were owed." Something shifted in his face then, not enough to fix him, not enough to make this some neat little redemption scene. Just enough to show he heard me. He swallowed. "So what now?" That was the first honest question he'd asked me in years. "Now," I said, "the company gets reviewed. The merger gets examined properly, and you deal with the consequences of trying to move faster than your character could carry you." He looked away. I could have left it there, probably should have, but I added one more thing. "Your father loved you, Brent. That was never the question. The question was whether you were ever going to become the kind of man who deserved to be trusted with what he built." He let out a breath and looked past me toward the chairs being folded at the back of the room. I don't know what answer he found in that room. Maybe none. Linda stepped forward, then smooth as ever. "Diane, we should go." I nodded. Brent didn't try to stop me this time. I walked out of that ballroom, down the hotel corridor, through the cool lobby, and into the bright Dallas afternoon. The air outside felt different than it had that morning. Warmer, easier to breathe. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. There would still be legal work, board meetings, follow-up documents, quiet people suddenly wanting very loud explanations. Brent's lenders would come calling. The review would uncover more than he had planned for anyone to see, and Mercer Industrial would have to steady itself after too many weeks of rumor and ambition dressed up as strategy. But the worst part was over. The lie had been stopped before it became policy. That mattered. Over the next few months, things unfolded in the least glamorous way possible, which frankly is how real consequences usually work. The merger died quietly. Not with headlines, not with dramatic resignations, just a gradual collapse once the review began and the numbers got looked at by people who weren't trying to impress anybody. The board stripped Brent of any unofficial influence he'd been collecting around himself. He was not banned from the company. He wasn't let out by security. Life rarely offers that kind of tidy ending. Instead, he was made ordinary. His calls got returned less quickly. His opinion stopped leading the room. Men who used to laugh too hard at his jokes started clearing their throats and checking their watches when he spoke. His loans were another matter. Those did not fade quietly. Within 6 months he sold the lake house lease, then the imported SUV, then a watch I had once seen him show off at Christmas like it was an heirloom instead of a purchase. Amber stayed for a while, at least from what I heard, but not long enough to prove anything noble. Last I heard, she'd moved into a condo in Uptown and was taking some time, which translated into plain English usually means the fantasy got expensive. Brent took a job after that, a real one, not ownership, not consulting, actual work. At a dealership of all places. There was something fitting about that, maybe because for the first time in his life he had to sell something honestly to somebody who could walk away. As for me, I stayed on just long enough to help stabilize things. 1 year. That was all I ever intended. I attended the meetings that mattered, voted when it counted, asked questions that made polished men uncomfortable, backed the pension protections, supported the plant managers who actually knew where the weak spots were. And when the company had found its footing again, I stepped back. Not because I was tired of fighting. Because I was done proving what never should have required proof. I sold the big house the following spring. Not in a rush, not out of defeat. Just because I didn't need all that space and grief sounds louder in empty rooms. I moved to a smaller place in Southlake with a shaded back patio and a kitchen that got good morning light. I kept Charles's chair, the Honda too. Some things don't need upgrading. A few months later, I helped fund a caregiver assistance program in Charles's name. Small grants, practical help, meal support, transportation, respite hours. The kind of help people actually need when illness drags on and dignity starts costing money. That mattered to me more than any seat at any table ever could. I never reconciled with Brent, not really. We spoke twice after that year. Both times politely, both times briefly. He never apologized in the way people imagine apologies should sound. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he didn't know how. And I never offered forgiveness just to make the story prettier. Some relationships don't heal, they just stop bleeding. That's enough sometimes. Every now and then I still think about that dinner table, the envelope, the check, the apartment list, the certainty in Brent's face when he thought he'd measured my worth correctly. He wasn't the first person to mistake quiet for weakness. He may not be the last. But he did learn something, whether he admits it or not. Money can buy you a seat at the table. Character is what lets you stay there. If you've ever been underestimated because of your age, your role, or your silence, then you probably know why I stayed calm that night. And if this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear what you would have done in my place. If you'd like to stay with me for more stories like this, you're welcome to subscribe.